William, how on earth did this happen? Maya wailed. What have I done? Why did you do this to me? How many times have I pleaded with you not to call me William? Hollered the imposing man in a pricey suit seated across from the girl. No one would guess he was over 50. Well-groomed visage, trendy haircut, fit physique. Even his salt and pepper hair added a certain allure. Fine, William, Maya hastily interjected. I apologize, please. I simply can't fathom why you suddenly decided to divorce me. Do you really not grasp the situation? I can hardly be shocked. How much insight should one expect from a simple farm girl whose education didn't go beyond the 9th grade? For ages, I harbored the hope that you pick up a few skills apart from draining my finances. Yet, the only noteworthy accomplishment you've managed is motherhood. Sure, we have a child. Needless to say, I wasn't exactly yearning for more offspring. My 4 previous marriages took care of that. But post-childbirth, you've grown complacent. You used to maintain yourself, hitting the salons and gyms, but now you've totally let yourself go. At 23, no less. Or perhaps you suppose that a man of my age, past 50, would marry solely for impassioned, pure love. I required a spouse reflective of my status, one who's attractive and meticulous, a trophy to parade around. Her intellectual depth or lack thereof, perhaps even, is a benefit. But with your naive thinking, you assumed that birthing my child meant I'd be tethered to you indefinitely, excusing you from self-care. Seeing Maya, her eyes agape with shock, staring back at him was jarring. He, who had always epitomized charm and steadiness, now stood agitated, poised on the brink. His ultimatum was harsh but clear. Either you leave the child with me and scatter to the winds, or be content with alimony. Decide quickly, because within the hour you might find yourself back in your desolate village, stuck there with no return. Trust me, I'm capable of arranging just that. Miller found herself in the center of the vast room, unable to fathom the reality of her current situation. Throughout her brief existence, Maya had always daydreamed about a wealthy prince and a life of opulence. As she grew into her own beauty, she became convinced that an encounter with a prince was just around the corner. Yet, men of noble lineage weren't exactly flocking to her small village. Unable to wait any longer, Miller ventured out, making her way to the bustling capital itself. She firmly believed that the moment her foot touched the asphalt of the city, a marriage proposal would be extended to her without delay. However, time slipped by and the proposals failed to materialize. Since she hadn't pursued further education beyond the 9th grade, Maya secured a position as a waitress. Fortuitously, her slender figure and striking features proved advantageous, landing her a position at a reputable and upscale cafe. The cafe owner disregarded her age upon realizing that the presence of this beautiful young woman significantly boosted customer traffic and, by extension, revenues. Miller exerted herself to the utmost, recognizing that her allure and attractiveness would ultimately determine the longevity of her employment. A few years down the line, Maya crossed paths with William. He gave her a thoughtful, lingering gaze before asking her out to dine. Maya certainly didn't pass up the opportunity. The day following their dinner, she woke up to coffee in bed and a marriage proposal, a fairy tale brought to life. At the billionaire's wedding, her friends from back home whispered jealously, "Just don't rely solely on the kids," cautioning her, "Cling to them through motherhood. Once a child comes, you can breathe easy." For 2 long years, Maya had fervently hoped to conceive, but to no avail. When she finally did and excitedly shared the news with her husband, his reaction was unexpectedly tepid. "Well, have the baby if that's what you want," he remarked dismissively. Post-delivery, Maya found a moment of calm. Surely William wouldn't leave now, not when it involved his own flesh and blood. Sadly, she couldn't have been more mistaken. The room they ended up in was adequately sized. With a bit of effort, it could be partitioned into 2 smaller sections, making a passable living space for 2, despite being part of a larger communal flat sharing a single bathroom and kitchen. This cramped space was all that remained of her once fairy tale liaison with her so-called Prince Charming. Without a second thought, William had ousted her and their young son from his life, banishing them to a modest room on the city's edge and allotting them a meager monthly stipend. At first, Maya could only weep. Accustomed to meticulously tracking her every cent, she was baffled by where all her funds had vanished. It appeared she hadn't splurged on anything substantial, perhaps just a couple of pizza deliveries and a bottle of perfume for herself. "Mom, I'm hungry." Young Jack gazed up at her with his enormous blue eyes, and it struck Miller just how thin her son had become. Just a moment, sweetheart. She hurried to her purse, but it was utterly empty. There's the card. It surely has some funds, she thought quickly, dashing to the stall. I'm sorry, but it looks like you don't have sufficient funds. The cashier, a woman with an indifferent expression, scrutinized the elegantly dressed young lady. Should we perhaps put this back then? Miller suggested, withdrawing a pricey cheese from the cart. The card failed to process. When she finally had just a packet of cookies left in her basket, the card emitted a hopeful beep. Burning with embarrassment, Miller bolted from the supermarket. Funds were non-existent, and the next payment from William was still far off. Miller pondered. Had she exhausted all of her finances? The young woman dialed her ex-husband's number. After hearing her pleas, he responded in a chilly manner. I'll transfer the agreed-upon funds to you. Any other predicaments are not my concern. If you find yourself lacking, it's high time you learn to be more frugal. The phone emitted a series of prolonged beeps. Frustrated, Myla felt the urge to hurl it onto the asphalt, but she quickly came to her senses. The phone was new and quite valuable. Suddenly, a thought struck her. She could sell the phone. She soared back home, thrusting a pack of biscuits and a leftover glass of milk into her son's grasp. Muller posted a few advertisements to sell the phone. Instantaneously, a potential buyer materialized and proposed an immediate purchase. Overjoyed, the girl dashed to meet him. An untidy, grinning young man casually thrust cash into her hands, snatched the phone, and swiftly fled. Stunned by this audacious behavior, Myla hurried to the store. Ma'am, I'm dialing the police. The saleswoman screeched indignantly. Do you think I'm daft, accepting counterfeits? Out of the entire sum, only one 500 note proved genuine. With it, the girl purchased milk, cereal, and bread before departing the store. Upon arriving home, she commenced boiling porridge. Why are you pouring water into the porridge? A voice chimed from somewhere nearby. Miller abruptly awakened. She stood in the kitchen, stirring the pot of porridge and shedding tears. In the corner of the room, near the window, an elderly lady sat in a rocking chair, gazing kindly at her through spectacles. Oh, you're about to scorch everything here, the old woman exclaimed, leaping up and making her way to the stove with the agility of a teenager. Pass it to me. An hour later, the trio indulged in the piping hot porridge. Mrs. Jenkins listened attentively to Myla's narrative without interruption. Once the meal was finished, the dishes cleaned, and her son tucked into bed, the women engaged in conversation. Living with a wealthy man sure is a challenge, sighed Mrs. Jenkins. You have to stay vigilant all the time, keeping both yourself and your husband on your toes. But hey, what's done is done. You'll be wiser from now on. So, what's your plan? I have no clue. I still own some jewelry, but I'm scared to sell it. Why not take it to a pawn shop? Mrs. Jenkins suggested. It's not a fortune, but at least it's honest money. Still, you're gonna need to find a job. Where can I go with Jack being so little? I can look after him. Not for free, obviously, but I won't charge an arm and a leg. Just for food, I'm happy to help, smiled the old lady. Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. A couple of days later, Myla found herself behind the counter of the very store where she'd recently faced humiliation. At first, the shopgirls eyed her with suspicion, but after hearing her story, they empathized and welcomed her into their group. One evening, as Miller returned from her job, she discovered her son peacefully slumbering, while Mrs. Jenkins sat beside him, engrossed in her knitting. I think I've gone totally blind, the grandmother lamented. I intended to craft a cozy sweater for the little guy for winter, but I reckon it's just not meant to be. Miller recalled a time from her childhood when she had a keen interest in knitting. That passion had faded until one day she thought, why not? Can I take a look? She inquired of the elderly lady. What a stunning piece, her friends exclaimed upon seeing the blouse. I'll buy it from you. About 6 months later, Miller resigned from her regular job. The flood of requests for her knitted creations had grown so vast that she couldn't possibly keep pace. She started showcasing her work online, and before long, she was receiving commissions from across the globe. A few years down the road, she inaugurated her own studio, staffing it with several skilled craftswomen. Mila upgraded from her modest room on the city's edge to a spacious apartment in a desirable area. Naturally, Mrs. Jenkins, her beloved old acquaintance, came to live with her. Greetings, you genuinely complete all your tasks manually. A young, gorgeous, stylishly dressed lady entered the office. Yes, without any machines, Mila responded with a smile. In that case, I'd love to place an order with you. Absolutely. Miller handed the guest her newest catalog and started brewing some coffee. The women didn't even notice how the time slipped away. Soon the visitor's phone started buzzing. Darling, I'm sorry, I just stopped by to order a few knitted items. The salon owner is so pleasant. We got caught up in conversation. Yeah, why did you join us? The young woman gave her husband the address and turned to Miller. My husband will be here soon, and we can look for something for him as well. Miller spotted William on the threshold of her home, her expression mirroring his shock. Do you two know each other? Miller's guest shot a bewildered glance from her to her spouse. He's my former wife, William replied with a serene demeanor. Then turning to Miller, he inquired, how have you been? How's Jack doing? We're all good, thanks. You don't have to worry about sending alimony anymore. I intend to keep my promise, William declared steadfastly. I'll continue to provide, notwithstanding the rise in costs. But what's the secret behind all this? He gestured broadly around Miller's office. It's all you're doing. You knocked me down into the dirt just when I needed a wake-up call. I mean it. No jokes. Thanks a lot.